a strategic sector in eastern Ukraine. 11:40 hours on a recent winter morning. Cold air hung motionless in the still pre-noon atmosphere. Temperature registered -12°C. Clear visibility extended across snow-covered terrain that would normally favor defenders observing movement. A Russian motorized rifle brigade, 2,900 combat soldiers, supported by 112 armored and soft-skinned vehicles, prepared to conduct tactical movement through contested terrain. The unit had received orders 3 days prior to relocate 47 kilometers to new defensive sector. The planned route required crossing Ukrainian defensive positions that intelligence assessed as heavily fortified with prepared fields of fire. Direct approach would require combat operation consuming time, ammunition, and lives. Resources Russian command preferred to conserve. Alternative route existed. Soviet-era tunnel constructed in 1967 during Cold War infrastructure programs, running 4.2 kilometers through a ridge, emerging behind Ukrainian defensive lines. The tunnel offered extraordinary tactical advantage. It provided completely concealed movement, avoiding Ukrainian observation posts and prepared artillery fires. Brigade could move entire force through tunnel and emerge at designated position without Ukrainian forces knowing movement had occurred. Russian engineers had verified through records and brief physical inspection that structure remained intact despite 58 years since construction. Large sections of Soviet military infrastructure had deteriorated significantly, but this tunnel appeared serviceable. Russian command authorized use of the tunnel for the movement operation based on engineering assessment. 18 hours later, 2,347 soldiers would be buried alive under 40 meters of collapsed earth and concrete. 112 vehicles would be entombed permanently in compressed mass of rubble, twisted metal, and human remains. The tunnel that promised safety and tactical advantage would become the largest mass grave in modern military history. Single incident producing more military deaths than many major battles. This happened days ago. No rescue is possible. Engineering assessment confirms excavation would cause additional collapses. The dead remain where they died, compressed under millions of tons. The strategic shock continues reverberating through Russian military command. This is what occurred during those 18 hours. The tunnel was constructed in 1967 as part of extensive Soviet civil defense infrastructure program, spanning multiple decades. Original purpose was providing protected route for military movements during potential nuclear conflict that Cold War strategists considered inevitable. Soviet military planning emphasized infrastructure redundancy and protected movement corridors. This tunnel was one element in vast network of hardened facilities. Construction employed reinforced concrete sections assembled underground through cut-and-cover technique in some areas, and excavation through solid rock in others. Design specifications called for structure capable of withstanding nearby conventional explosions and some nuclear blast effects at specified overpressures. Engineers calculated loading requirements based on geological surveys and structural analysis using Soviet standards of the era. The tunnel stretched 4.2 kilometers through solid rock ridge, rising 130 meters above surrounding terrain. Entry and exit portals were reinforced with massive concrete structures designed to prevent collapse from surface explosions. Interior consisted of 2 lanes wide enough for military vehicles, with vertical clearance sufficient for trucks and light armored vehicles, but not for heavy equipment like tanks on transporters. Original lighting systems had failed decades ago, but the basic structural tunnel appeared sound to casual inspection. Russian engineers conducted inspection prior to authorizing tunnel use. The inspection was limited by time constraints and equipment availability. Engineers examined portal structures visually, walked representative sections of tunnel checking for obvious damage like fallen concrete or water infiltration, and reported structure appeared serviceable for intended use. The inspection was fundamentally superficial, visual assessment only without structural testing. No engineering analysis of current load-bearing capacity. No assessment of how 60 years of freeze-thaw cycles, water infiltration, and concrete degradation had affected structural integrity. No verification that original construction actually met design specifications. Soviet-era construction quality varied enormously depending on priorities and oversight. Ukrainian intelligence learned of Russian plans to use tunnel through informant networks that had been carefully cultivated over months. The intelligence was remarkably detailed, likely provided by someone with access to Russian operational planning. Reports specified timing, force composition, planned route, and intended use of tunnel. Ukrainian command received this intelligence 48 hours before Russian movement was scheduled. Ukrainian command made immediate decision upon receiving intelligence. This was extraordinary opportunity that might never recur. An entire brigade would be concentrated in confined space with no escape routes and no ability to maneuver. Properly executed demolition operation could eliminate the entire force with minimal friendly casualties and minimal resource expenditure. The opportunity was too significant to ignore. Ukrainian combat engineers were tasked with tunnel demolition planning within hours of receiving intelligence. The objective was not merely damaging tunnel to prevent use, but ensuring complete collapse along entire length that would entomb everyone inside with no possibility of survival or escape. Engineers approached problem with professional methodology refined through extensive combat engineering experience. Engineers studied Soviet construction documents captured from archives in liberated territories. The documents provided detailed structural specifications, including locations of load-bearing columns, roof support systems, and concrete reinforcement patterns. Engineers identified 8 critical structural points, load-bearing columns and roof supports that maintain tunnel stability. These points were distributed along tunnel length to ensure complete collapse rather than localized damage. Demolition charges were emplaced over 2 nights of dangerous infiltration operations. Small teams of combat engineers, 4 to 6 personnel each, infiltrated through Ukrainian defensive lines and crossed into contested territory. Teams entered tunnel through concealed approach routes, moved through darkness to assigned positions, and positioned charges at designated structural points. Each charge was specifically calculated based on structural analysis. Too small might damage without collapsing. Too large might create explosive venting that would waste energy. The charges employed shaped demolition techniques, directing force precisely into structural supports to maximize effectiveness. Charge emplacement required technical precision under dangerous conditions. Engineers worked in darkness inside enemy-controlled tunnel using night vision equipment. Each charge had to be positioned exactly at calculated point on structural element. Charges were connected to detonation cord that would propagate firing signals simultaneously to all positions. Engineers verified electrical circuits multiple times using test equipment. The operation would succeed only if all 8 charges fired simultaneously within milliseconds, creating cascading structural failure that would collapse tunnel along its entire length. Sequential detonation might allow partial structural stability or create escape routes. At 11:40 hours on the day of Russian movement, Russian forces began entering tunnel. Led vehicles were BRDM reconnaissance elements conducting advanced screening. These were followed by main body consisting of T-72 tanks, BMP infantry fighting vehicles, MTLB armored personnel carriers, and various support vehicles. The column proceeded at standard tactical speed for confined movement, approximately 20 km per hour. Standard spacing between vehicles meant the entire brigade would fit inside the 4.2-kilometer structure with minimal clearance when fully committed. Ukrainian observers monitored Russian progress through multiple intelligence sources. Informants positioned near tunnel portals reported column composition and timing using covert communications. Electronic surveillance intercepted Russian tactical radio transmissions coordinating movement. Visual observation posts on high ground confirmed vehicles entering portal. Intelligence officers maintained running calculations. When would maximum force be committed to tunnel? Brigade command vehicles entered tunnel at 11:43, positioning themselves in middle of column as standard practice. Electronic warfare vehicles entered at 11:45. Final logistics vehicles entered at 11:46. Ukrainian intelligence officer monitoring all sources confirmed at 11:47 that entire Russian column was inside tunnel. All 2,900 soldiers, all 112 vehicles. The entry portal was closed by final vehicle. The exit portal showed lead reconnaissance elements approaching but had not yet emerged. Perfect timing. Everyone inside, nowhere to escape. Ukrainian engineer officer transmitted detonation command at precisely 11:47 hours and 18 seconds. The signal propagated through detonation cord at 7,000 meters per second. 8 charges fired simultaneously within microseconds of each other. The explosions were precisely directed into structural supports through shaped charge technique that focused explosive force. Reinforced concrete shattered under directed blast. Steel reinforcement fractured from explosive shock. Load-bearing columns failed structurally. The ridge above, weighing millions of tons, settled downward into voids created by collapsing tunnel in catastrophic progressive failure. The collapse propagated along entire 4.2-kilometer length in 23 seconds of cascading structural failure. Soldiers inside experienced terrifying warning in final moments of life. Sound of explosions transmitted through rock, dust falling from ceiling as first structural elements failed, then complete structural failure as ceiling sections collapsed. Tunnel sections pancaked downward, ceiling meeting floor with everything between being compressed. Vehicles were crushed instantly by falling concrete and rock. 40 meters of earth and broken tunnel structure settled onto the collapsed passage with irresistible force. Tank armor designed to stop projectiles provided absolutely no protection against millions of tons crushing from above. T-72 tanks with their thick composite armor were flattened like tin cans under hydraulic press. Vehicles were compressed vertically until barely recognizable. Crews inside died instantly from crushing trauma or were trapped in compressing steel hulls that became coffins. Infantry soldiers outside vehicles had seconds to comprehend disaster before collapse reached them. Some attempted running toward portals hoping to escape. The collapse moved faster than humans could run, propagating at over 150 meters per second. Concrete and earth caught fleeing soldiers, crushing them or burying them alive under cascading debris. Screams were brief before being silenced by collapsing mass. A few soldiers in vehicles near portals survived initial collapse, but were trapped as portal structures failed, sealing both ends completely. Complete structural failure occurred within 90 seconds from first detonation. Where there had been open tunnel allowing vehicle passage, there was now solid mass of broken concrete, twisted steel, crushed vehicles, and buried soldiers compressed under 40 meters of earth and rock. The ridge had settled into new stable geological configuration, incorporating all materials previously in the tunnel void. Compression forces were enormous, calculated at over 2 tons per square meter in some areas. Ukrainian forces observed collapse through multiple sensors. Seismic sensors detected underground structural failure, registering as minor earthquake. Ground shook from massive underground displacement. Dust clouds emerged from both portals as compressed air was forced out. The portals themselves collapsed within 2 minutes as support structures failed, sealing both tunnel entrances under thousands of tons of rubble. Within 5 minutes, both tunnel entrances were blocked by compacted debris. No visual evidence remained of the opening that had existed. Russian command lost all contact with brigade at precise moment of collapse. Radio transmissions ceased instantly and completely. No distress calls, no reports of contact, no emergency signals. Complete communications blackout that was absolute and terrifying to commanders expecting routine movement reports. Initial assessment assumed electronic warfare jamming by Ukrainian forces, possible but unusual for rear area. As minutes passed without contact restoration, anxiety increased. Reality was more complete than mere jamming. Everyone was dead or dying, radios crushed with their operators. Hours passed before Russian command understood what had actually occurred. Reconnaissance elements attempting to contact brigade found collapsed portals where tunnel entrances had been. Engineers were dispatched and conducted hasty assessment. They reported catastrophic structural failure along entire tunnel length. The entire brigade was entombed under 40 meters of unstable rubble. No survivors were possible given collapse magnitude. Rescue operations would be impossible. 40 meters of unstable rubble over crushed tunnel meant excavation would cause additional progressive collapse. Every attempt to dig would trigger further cave-ins, killing anyone who might have survived initial collapse. The numbers were final and absolute, with no possibility of revision. 2,900 soldiers buried alive based on unit roster. 2,347 confirmed dead. calculated from personnel records showing who entered tunnel. Survivors numbered exactly 0, 112 vehicles entombed permanently. The brigade ceased to exist in most literal sense. Personnel and equipment no longer existed in accessible form. Cause of death varied among the entombed. Some soldiers died instantly from crushing collapse, concrete falling on vehicles or bodies with forces measured in hundreds of tons. Death was instantaneous from massive trauma. Others survived initial collapse but were trapped in voids between rubble, dying from injuries that could not be treated. From asphyxiation as oxygen in confined spaces depleted over hours, or from hypothermia in dark, cold spaces where temperatures dropped below freezing. Radio intercepts detected transmissions for up to 18 hours after collapse before final signals ceased, documenting slow death of survivors. The psychological horror was extraordinary and almost incomprehensible. Soldiers trapped in absolute darkness, many injured severely, knowing rescue was impossible, listening to comrades dying around them, waiting for inevitable death. Some had functioning radios and transmitted farewells to families, messages intercepted by Ukrainian signals intelligence and later by Russian forces. These transmissions were recordings of men facing certain death with dignity or desperation. Eventually, these recordings were released publicly, creating devastating impact on Russian public opinion as families heard loved ones dying slowly underground. Equipment losses totaled $896 million, calculated at replacement cost. 112 vehicles of various types buried permanently, 29 T-72 tanks valued at approximately $4 million each, 33 BMP fighting vehicles, 18 MTLB carriers, 4 Pantsir air defense systems worth $15 million each, 2 electronic warfare vehicles, 26 trucks and support vehicles. Recovery was economically and physically impossible. Even if excavation was somehow attempted at enormous cost and risk, vehicles had been crushed beyond any possible repair. Steel hulls were flattened, mechanical systems destroyed, electronics pulverized. The equipment would remain entombed indefinitely until geological timescales made recovery irrelevant. The strategic impact exceeded direct losses significantly. An entire brigade eliminated in single stroke removed major formation from Russian operational planning. The loss affected force structure across entire front, but psychological impact was far greater than mere numbers. Russian soldiers refused to use tunnels or underground facilities anywhere, fearing similar fate. Every underground position, every tunnel, every basement became source of terror rather than shelter. Trust in infrastructure collapsed entirely. Operations requiring underground movement were refused by troops who considered orders suicide. Combat effectiveness declined across forces as soldiers second-guessed orders. Families of buried soldiers demanded explanation and recovery with increasing anger. Why was tunnel not properly inspected by competent engineers? Why were all forces committed to single route without reserves or alternative? Why cannot bodies be recovered for proper burial? These questions created political crisis that Russian government initially attempted to suppress. Claims were made of combat losses in fighting. Eventually, truth emerged through intercepted radio transmissions and testimony from nearby units, creating public outrage that demanded accountability. International observers noted this represented largest single-incident military loss in modern warfare by considerable margin. No battle, no bombardment, no airstrike had killed so many so quickly in single location. The precision of Ukrainian operation was remarkable. Entire enemy brigade eliminated with 8 demolition charges, costing perhaps $50,000 total for explosives and equipment. Cost-exchange ratio exceeded 15,000 to 1. The site remains sealed by military necessity and engineering impossibility. No memorial is possible because location remains inactive military zone. Families have no graves to visit, no physical location to mourn. The soldiers remain where they died, 40 meters underground, crushed in vehicles or compressed in voids between rubble, forever entombed in what historians would later describe as modern warfare's largest mass grave. Body recovery remains impossible both practically and ethically. Engineering analysis confirms that any excavation attempt would trigger additional collapses, potentially killing recovery personnel. The unstable rubble mass requires decades to settle into stable configuration before any safe excavation could be contemplated. By that time, remains would be unrecoverable, even if access were somehow achieved. The tactical lessons were documented extensively in military journals worldwide. Underground facilities provide concealment but create concentration vulnerability. Single-route dependencies eliminate tactical flexibility. Historical infrastructure requires modern engineering assessment before use. Trust in old structures is misplaced without verification. The lessons were written in blood and buried under 40 meters of collapsed tunnel. The numbers define horror with mathematical precision. 2,900 buried alive, 2,347 confirmed dead, 112 vehicles entombed, 4.2 kilometers collapsed, 18 hours from entry to last transmission, 896 million lost permanently, 23 seconds from detonation to complete collapse. This is warfare where infrastructure becomes tomb, where enemy preparation creates inescapable trap, where 18 hours transforms entire brigade into underground mass grave that will persist through geological time. The tunnel is collapsed, the brigade is buried, the families mourn at empty graves, and military planners worldwide learn that concentration in confined spaces creates catastrophic vulnerability, that underground routes are death traps without guaranteed security, that one brigade can enter tunnel and none emerge. Welcome to warfare, where underground becomes death sentence, where one brigade enters tunnel and none emerge, where Soviet infrastructure becomes largest military cemetery in modern history, where 23 seconds of collapse eliminates force that took years to build.